The first memory that I have of storytelling was sitting in the synagogue with my mother when I was a little girl. And she would be looking at the prayer books and she would be reading Bible stories to me. And then later on when I grew up, I looked for the same stories in the book and they weren't there. She had told me the stories instead of reading them from the book. They just weren't there. And that was my first inkling that, there was something like storytelling. But I really didn't get into storytelling myself until I was an adult. I have been a school librarian for 37 years, just retired in June. And I went to a library conference and heard my first storytellers. And I thought, oh, that would be so exciting. I would love to do that. I like standing up in front of a group and showing off, and but I'm not an ad-libber, so it's nice to have something to tell and something to do. And I went to a number of classes after that. After I heard my first stories, I started going to workshops, and I was just afraid to quite do it without, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to remember the stories when I got up in front of a group. And I went to a conference with somebody, and she said, well, she just told stories to the kids, and she read stories to the kids. And I thought, well, if I read the same story 5 or 6 times, I'll have memorized the story, at least have learned it enough so that I didn't need to have the book in my hand. And that's what I did. I read stories to my kids 5 or 6 times, put the book down, and it was magic. The kids looked at me, just like the kids this morning, looked at me with their mouths open, staring out at me, engrossed in what I had to say. And for somebody who taught Dewey Decimal System and the card catalog, I didn't quite get that same rapture when I would do those lessons with them. And so I started telling stories to my elementary kids, and they were just so engrossed, and I can get them to do anything I wanted to and listen to me. And then I was transferred up to the middle school, and the kids kept saying, well, why don't you tell us stories anymore? And my thought was, well, they're older, they don't like stories. Stories are for little kids. And I thought, well, I'll just try. And so I dressed up as Scheherazade, and I told the story of Scheherazade in the Arabian Nights. And I had the same reaction from the older kids. They looked at me, and they stared at me, and their mouths were opened, and they loved what I had done. And I'm the kind of person that once I glom onto something, I want the whole world to do the same thing. So as soon as I started telling stories to the kids, I started going out to libraries and telling stories. And I wanted to have my students tell stories, my middle school students, because I wanted them to feel as good as I did, getting up in front of an audience, building my confidence, building their confidence. And I started the Chatterton Tale Spinners, which was a middle school storytelling club. And I saw miracles happen. These kids, I attracted kids, gifted kids, and kids who were bright and who were in sports and in everything. And I attracted the kids who were loners, who didn't have any place else to go. They didn't quite fit in with the athletes. They didn't fit in with the bright kids. But they just came and they showed up. And to watch these kids develop over 3 years and get excited about telling stories and get that confidence and feel good about themselves and to learn stories, and it helped them with, when we would interview them for like a show or at a workshop, they would say, well, what has storytelling helped you with? And kids said it helped them with their schoolwork, it helped them with their remembering things, made them feel good, they got friends, they were never allowed to criticize each other. They would give each other suggestions for improvement, but they were never, we never had contests like who was the best. We always tried to improve our own stories. And just to see those kids develop, and now when I see these kids later on, I've gotten notes for them. And as a librarian, you don't really bond with the kids because they're not your kids for a whole year. You're just sort of there helping them, and they like me. But having my own students, my own tale spinners, they really bonded with me, and I've kept in touch with a number of them throughout the years. In the summer of 2000, Kevin Cordy and I had been meeting at the National Storytelling Conference for a number of years, talking about what we did with kids and talking about how wonderful storytelling with kids is and getting them to tell stories. And in the summer of 2000, Kevin asked me if I would like to write a book with him, which is something that a librarian always wants to do, to have her own book. And I said, oh yes, this would be great. And we worked for 2.5 years and came up with Raising Voices, Creating Youth Storytelling Groups and Troops. And it takes the reader from beginning to end about learning how to tell stories, teaching their kids to tell stories. And we've gotten lots of feedback from teachers how it's helped them and helped their kids, and just wanting to share this information with teachers and other kids. For me, it's having the kids develop self-confidence, and for me, it's having the kids being able to express themselves. Most adults fear public speaking. And if you get them early enough, you know, from young kids, these kids that were in the tape this morning, to be able to get up there and to tell a story to a group and get some feedback from the group, it just makes them feel so much better about themselves. It also helps them in school. It helps them to remember what their lessons are. It helps with their imaginations. It helps them to visualize what it is that they're going to be reading. And many of my students who have been storytellers go on later on to drama and do other things with story. A lot of them become writers because they know the structure of stories, they know how stories work, they know how to work with an audience, and they know how to have a rapport with an audience. And so that helps with their writing, helps them with their self-confidence and their presence. And what I thought was important, number one, I think storytelling should not be competitive. I think storytelling should be something that everybody can do and enjoy doing just because they're going to be reacting with an audience and learning a story. I also think that kids need to help each other and to give each other confidence and to support each other in the storytelling. And that's what this book does. It gives lessons and ways of learning the story so they're not memorized, so they're not rote, but they're sharing a conversation between the storyteller and the audience. And the book helps them with different kinds of lessons to do that. I find my kids, you know, they want to tell a story, they tell it through once and then they think they're done. But the more they tell it, the more they work with it, the better the story becomes, the more they become into the story, and it just blossoms.